Black people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Santa, why you see us? Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Ooh, where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.
Garvey lives! Garvey lives! Garvey lives! Mosiah lives! Mosiah lives! Mosiah lives! Greetings, African family. Welcome to another Mosiah session, our penultimate Mosiah session of the year 62-64, or some of you may call it 2023. for. We give thanks and praises, sisters and brothers, for you being here on this Imani Day, Babylon Saturday afternoon, for a very special, very important session that we've got for you this afternoon. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are on the planet. It's a greeting to the most precious, powerful, and bountiful name of our motherland, Alkebu-Lan, the spirits of our most gracious ancestors, and in the prayer for oneness, hope, and prosperity for all African people on the face of Mother Earth. Sisters and brothers, my name is Brother Olatunji Haru from the Alkebu-Lan Revivalist Movement, and we are here today to engage in a very important, very vital, very timely Mosiah session. Our guest is with us, ready and raring to go. Before we do that, just some standard Mosiah formalities that we engage in, sisters and brothers, every time we come together. One of which is what we call the Mosiah Daily Affirmation. When we created the Mosiah season in the year 1998, sisters and brothers, we created the official guide called the Mosiah Daily Affirmation, 31 days of affirmations from the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and accompanied by a commentary for each one of those days. And also we had and created a memory verse for the children as well for each of those days. So sisters and brothers, we're going to get straight into that. This being the very last day of the Mosiah season, day number 31. We're going to go to affirmation number 31, sisters and brothers, and it is called appropriately, Garvey lives. And the prophet says, my work is just begun, and as I lay down my life for the cause of my people, so do I feel that succeeding generations shall be inspired by the sacrifice I have made for the rehabilitation of our race. Christ died to make men free. I shall die to give courage and inspiration to my race. If Garvey dies, Garvey lives. Never forget your God. Remember that we live, work, and pray for a binding racial hierarchy, whose only natural, spiritual, and political limits shall be God and Africa, at home and abroad. With God's dearest blessing, I leave you for a while. One love. And we say, such is the wisdom of the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Hail to the proud of word, hail to the proud of word, hail to the proud of word. And as I said, sisters and brothers, each affirmation is accompanied by the word sounds of our spiritual leader, Brother Leader Bandaka, the visionary who gave us the Mosiah season. And the commentary goes as thus: speak not of the righteous as dead. Ancestral wisdom. The spirit of Papa Garvey lives on. We saw it in Omawale Malcolm X. We saw it in the anti-colonial movement in Africa, in the Rastafari and Black Power movements, in the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, Black Studies, Afrocentricity, PAC, and Mama Donzamo, Madikizela Mandela. He lives on also in the many books and messages written and uttered in his name. Papa Garvey, our protector, our king, our prophet, our Messiah, our manifestation of Mwari, the creator, remains a mammoth source of inspiration for us all. In Mwari's name, let us honor and give thanks to this precious soul and his colossal legacy. One Jah, one aim, one destiny. Let us fulfill our destiny. As we give thanks and praise to sister and brother for the word sound of Brother Leader Bandaka. We say, hail to the proud of word, hail to the proud of word, hail to the power of the word. And of course, Mosiah is a family occasion, and we accompany the affirmations with the memory verse from the Watotos as well, sisters and brothers. As we have 31 affirmations, the children have 31 memory verses for them to recite every day. And the memory verse for day 31 is thus: look for me in the whirlwind, look for me in the storm, look for me all around you, for my spirit shall bring freedom to form. Look for me in the whirlwind, look for me in the storm, look for me all around you, for my spirit shall bring freedom to form. And one more time, sisters and brothers, look for me in the whirlwind, look for me in the storm, look for me all around you, for my spirit shall bring freedom to form. That, sisters and brothers, are our memory verses for the Watotos. As I said, this is our penultimate session, sisters and brothers. We do have an extra one going into the month of Athajafo, September. That's going to take place in the evening, next Thursday, evening, the 5th of September. That's going to be the impact of the UNIA on the Spanish-speaking world. That's going to be delivered by our brother based in Spain, brother Abui Mfubir. A very important session, sisters and brothers, just to emphasize the global link of Papa Garvey, sisters and brothers. But you know what you're here for, sisters and brothers. Our guest today is Sister Sheila Brown. Now, if you haven't heard of our sister or seen our sister before, you are in for an absolute treat. Even if you have heard of her, you're still in for an absolute treat, sisters and brothers, but it will be more of a surprise treat if you haven't heard of her before. But let me just say, our sister Sheila is a passionate motivator. She takes listeners on an intense journey with her struggles and triumphs from her own life, confronting her issues. She's an author. She's an Ancestor-Inspired book of recipes she's written. She consulted CEOs and executive teams to develop multi-year strategy plans. And last year, if you tune in, sisters and brothers, you remember her channeling and imbibing the spirit of Queen Mama Amy, Euphemia Jacques Garvey, and really which was a spiritual occurrence, the like which many of us had never witnessed before, sisters and brothers. It really was something special. But today, we're going to go into something even deeper, even more vital, more pressing for the time that we're in. So without further ado, I'm going to bring forward our beloved sister, Sheila Brown, to the stage. Greetings, Sister Sheila. We're honored and just really delighted to have you back with us again. As I said to you, we're communicating. People have been asking, when are we going to bring back Sister Sheila? And so when you said you're available, I know you've got a lot going on right now, but you gave up some time for us. We're honored and grateful for that, my sister. How are you doing, Sister Sheila?
Blessings, King. I'm so good and so honored to be here. It's such a great relief from the work that I've been doing. I told you I'm in the middle of a move, so I'm taking some time out to deal with the ancestors and this very powerful message. I believe that the Most High wants us to bring to our consciousness today, as well as the people of the Most High, as the Garveyites were back then, and we still are today.
Yeah, let me just say, sister, that title that you gave us to deliver, wow, Garvey speaks to us of war. What World War III means for the global African family, prepared or not. I tell you, that is messy. What I'm going to do, sister, I'm going to really just give you the floor and just deliver. And just take the floor and just take our people on the journey and give them a message that we know that we need to hear from you. I know the ancestors are working for you, sister. So just take away the floor and go ahead, please.
Great. Greetings, King. Tell me how much time do we have today?
We normally, the message you can deliver for up to an hour if you like, doing a question. It's a 2-hour session. So you've got an hour maybe, and then we can open up for people listening to give comments, questions, whatever. So yeah, so go with that as a guidance. If you need more time, though, it's a big but again, but we were going to give you time to lay out what you need to lay out. Okay. And then we'll go from there.
Okay, great. So first, let me just state my intentions, because that's very important to do in this work, right? There's a lot of people that come and they speak, and they have all motives that don't necessarily align with Garveyism in the way that Garvey and Mother Amy Jacques Garvey would have wanted it to. So let's first set the stage and invite the divine, so that I can subdue my own ego, my own fatigue, my own faults and insecurities, so that I can be a conduit for a very powerful message that I believe is important enough that I would come as ill-prepared as I feel to talk about what I want to talk about. And I'm sure that there are people who are experts in these topics as well. But what I feel tasked to do is to convey an important reminder, really. Most of us know this who have studied Garveyism, and students of of social issues, students of race issues, students of economics have all talked about these things. But what I want to do is bring another perspective, from the perspective of my work as an attorney, my work as a strategic planner, my work as a emergency preparedness trainer, if you will. And I hate that term because it doesn't adequately describe what it is I'm talking about. And I lose the people that I intend to deliver the message to because of the term emergency preparedness. But what I'm talking about is actually what the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was motivated to start the UNIA about, and to galvanize over 400 million is the number that they believed they were working with, at the term Negroes at the time, to organize and even to prepare themselves for a central theme that many of us overlook. We're talking about, just like the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey and all of their comrades in leadership and in service were talking about at the time, which was the subject of conflict, of war, and the impact that it has at the intersection of racism and resources. Because all war, all conflicts, whether between European nations or interdependent wars between European nations and other nations that are termed third world, right? All of it has to do with resources and the acquisition, control, and domination of resources. And so we oftentimes get so caught up in the facial experiences of what we refer to as racism, discrimination, abuse, that we overlook oftentimes that the core issues surrounding all of these things that the rest of the world has seemed to understand more clearly than I believe we have been able to articulate to our people. It is about resources. And sometimes human beings are considered resources. In an organized and so-called civilized world, we call it human capital, where people get paid to do a function, whether it's blue collar work or white collar work. And in a more barbaric society where guts and gore and civility are no longer on the table, where the lights are out, if you will, and anything goes, where governments and citizens agree that there is no rule of law when it comes to taking what you need and abusing anyone who gets in your way. Well, the world has been in this place several times. And unfortunately, when Black people have found themselves on the weaker end of this asymmetric dynamic, right? And I don't want to use terms that sound fancy. What I mean is symmetry. When there's symmetry, there's balance, right? When we describe people who are beautiful, we usually like symmetry in the face. If a person has an eye up here and an eye up here, down here, we call them ugly, right? They don't fit the symmetrical look that we expect in a beauty. Well, just like symmetry of the face is important to people, and when it's asymmetrical, we consider it ugly. Well, in war and resources and power between races, when there is asymmetry, there is ugliness. And nobody experiences the asymmetrical dynamic more than people of African descent, whether that was in the 1900s, the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s, or the 1500s. For the last 400 years, our people have been engaged in a overt and sometimes subversive and ambiguous war. And oftentimes the war hasn't been over us as the resource, and sometimes it's for the resources that we stand on. And why this is important is because the entire cusp of the circumstances surrounding the development of what we now refer to as the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, it stems from, it births from circumstances that had already taken shape before the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey took his first breath. His entire life was shaped by the Berlin Conference and all of these events where people were sharing and dispersing the resource that is Africa. that to this day defines our relationship with power, whether we are in Europe, whether we are living in China, whether we are on our own continent, or whether we are in the United States, no matter where we are, as the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was preaching about, Black men, as he was speaking to his audience in 1921 at the second conference, right, our second convention in New York, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey had one thing on his mind. The entire speech is about war and our willingness or unwillingness, our preparedness or ill preparedness to cope with the outcomes and the active harshness of war. And he even talks about, through all of his speeches, you can find it in books written about him, speeches that he gave directly, and even Mother Amy Jacques Garvey. There is a constant theme of war. They were obsessed with the status of the world because whatever was happening in Europe, whatever was happening in Asia, it had a direct impact on our people. And this is our people globally, whether we were on the continent and being shipped out to go fight wars in Europe because of the subjugation of the continent. In fact, there were three things that were a theme that he was always warning us about the attitudes of the European diaspora. And the first of the three phases that we were always battling against had to do with subjugation. And he talked about the fact that if a weak people, were willing to be subjugated, then that was what the initial encounter were. And through the subjugation, the next phase is exploitation of the land, exploitation of the people, exploitation in every way possible, whether that was sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, psychological exploitation, medical exploitation, right? All of these exploitations fit under the theme of war. And he ironically took the position that Napoleon took when asked, what side was God on? The Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey says, I agree, I concur with Napoleon that God is on the side of whoever has the biggest army. In other words, God did not make one race superior over the other. God put the resources on the earth, and he allowed each of us as tribes, nations, and people to organize ourselves, to be custodians or stewards, and to defend what belongs to us, right? And so this is the theme of the 1920s, the 1919s. And so I'm talking about this, I'm setting the stage for this because there are a convergence of circumstances that are occurring right now as we speak with the exact same players that were in position to make moves that were impacting the lives of African people back in 1919 at the close of World War I, when African American soldiers were returning to the United States, uniforms still on, the sight of blood that they had for the first time, probably in a long time, being given since the Civil War, permission to execute in a war setting any man who posed a threat to the values that the war embodies, right? And so this energy, this power that came to them returned with them to the United States, where it was no longer welcome and no longer needed. The most vulnerable times for people of African descent globally while under the subjugation of European powers. And walk with me through this, because I'm laying the foundation for what I want to talk about, this intersection of racism and resources and what we need to be discussing and what we need to be doing individually and collectively. Has a lot to do with what happened over 100 years ago, almost to the date, when Mother Amy Jacques Garvey, again, war on her mind, is talking in her article called Africa Bides Her Time about the Chinese and European conflict and how it was the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey who initiated the term, if Europe must be for the Europeans, then Africa must be for Africa, and inherent in that, Asia for the Asiatics. Well, that Asia for the Asiatics, which was created by a Black man, as Mother Amy Jacques Garvey pointed out, the world was listening to this provincial president of Africa. Well, the Asians of China took that slogan and said, that's right, Asia for the Asiatics. And they waged war using that as the slogan for the war cry of millions of oppressed Chinese to let Europeans know and feel that their home was in Europe unless they were willing to be governed by the Chinese. We are talking about war and resources, the resources of land, of water, which is an important theme that I want to talk about today, of the air, which has not only to do with the oxygen that we breathe, but the airspace that we travel through and the airspace that we communicate through, right? I'm talking about the technology of the day in the language of the ancients. It's air, fire, earth, and water, the most primitive of resources that develop all of the technology, the war strategies, and the war tools that we have today. It's essentially about those elements. And we happen to be standing on, if you're on the continent, the home, the cradle of every single resource, completely independent of the world for self-sustaining. So when we are looking at events unfolding, the public-facing communication strategy is to say, this is a war about democracy between Ukraine and Russia, between China and Taiwan or Japan, right? So the forward-facing, but trust and believe that all of these wars have at the core control over resources, and the most primary and important resource of all is the continent of Africa and its people, whom, if not organized, if not sovereign, and if not prepared, will become reviewed as by the stronger peoples. It's a theme that the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was always talking about, that the weaker peoples will always be subject to extermination by the stronger peoples, right? He wasn't racializing it in terms of whether or not people like us. He's talking facts. He's talking realities, and he's bringing it to the people at a time where they can feel it, because nobody in 1920 was more directly impacted by these asymmetrical resource dynamic and control than Black women, their children, and Black men, right? When you control the resources during times of scarcity, the people who are voiceless, the people who are powerless, the people who are without the full enjoyments and benefits of citizenship, due process, do not get the same access to resources that those who are in control do. And so this is a central theme, because when I am listening to the radio stations of today, and it's not very often that I'm in the car driving and just get a chance to see, what are my people listening to? What are they talking about? Just like yesterday, I was in the car, I was driving from one location to the next during this move. And I just, let me see what's on one of the popular radio stations. And I heard intelligent Black people, adults, having a conversation in a time like this, where we are on the brink of World War III, which we should be having a convention about the impact that these events are going to have, that should be 3 times the population of those attendees at the UNI convention in 1921, because this is hurting us. This is going to have a direct impact on us. It's going to have a direct impact on us at a micro level and at a macro level, right? And it's going to we're going to see some of the same issues that they were waging, crying out against, and even organizing themselves against, and appealing to the global powers of the world. Our vocal cords, Provisional President Marcus Garvey, took on the task of informing his people, raising their consciousness, but then even taking the battle to the legislative, political, and economic engines of this world to say, reconsider your position. Right? You don't want to compete with African people for the resources, for the food, for the water, for the jobs. Yet you don't want us to have an independent nation. What do you want from us? It is clear that the 3 options were subjugation, exploitation, and if you weren't willing to comply with that as slaves, then extermination. Those are the stages of our encounters with European powers from the last 400 to 500 years, and other nations have experienced similarly. The battle is more sophisticated today. The battle is biological. The battle is mosquitoes. The battle is genetically modified foods. The battle could take in the form of medicine, in the form of contaminated vaccines. This is not something I'm making up. Just do the research and you will find that wars have been waged. They're called Cold Wars, right, at times. And now we have this other dynamic where it's an informational war. And I believe that the people who were listening to that radio station were asked an important question to the alleged host of that show. And that question was, what do you remember from your past that you wore back in the day that you regret to this day? What hairstyles did you regret wearing back in the day? And I'm saying to myself, am I hearing this? This is the conversation that adults, 3 adults who have the attention of the masses, and you're asking these people at a time like this, what hairstyles, and the calls came flooding in. Oh, it was the Jerry curl girl. When people saw me coming with the Jerry curl, I mean, it's buffoonery at its finest, but it's more than that. It's more than buffoonery. It is outrageous and outright intellectual genocide, conscientious genocide, that people are participating at a time like this in conversations so trivial, where every time I turn on the right news channels, listen to the right stations, I'm hearing people preparing in this country and in Europe for war, literally. World War III. And what does that look like? And what happens if, just like in 1859, when we had what was called the Carrington event? You ever heard of the Carrington event, King? It was an event, a phenomenon where the entire universe decided to send a solar flare our way to our planet, and it created what was called an EMP effect. In other words, it was an electromagnetic pulse. It typically happens every 150 years. We are long overdue for it. And even if we don't get to experience the natural one that we're long overdue for, if you're listening to the right news, if you are doing like Mother Amy Jacques Garvey did back in the 1970s, 18s, 19s, 20s, all the way up into her husband's demise, preparing him with the news of the world that would impact people of African descent. No one in our community is having an ongoing, intellectual, engaging conversation about the intersection between race and resources, and now the culmination of a war. That every time you hear Russia, you hear Africa. Every time you hear Ukraine, you're hearing, oh, if Ukraine doesn't make it, the people of Africa will starve, right? It's always a reference indirectly to Africa, right? And its people. And Africans, even as we speak, just as they were in other European wars, were shipped off to help arm. It's a part of the treaties that people sign when they engage with other nations they are in an asymmetrical lower position of power. One of the things that you sometimes exchange as a nation is a commitment to provide military men to protect and defend nations that you don't even get to participate in the economies in. It happened then, right? Where people on the continent were being shipped off against their will to fight wars like in World War I, and they weren't being treated humanely. And when they helped to achieve the goals and asked for just the pay that was promised them, they could literally find themselves executed, as the French did to a group of Africans that they had at their disposal. So this is nothing to be taken lightly. But at a micro level, when I'm looking at single Black women who are vulnerable even more so to the instabilities of just economic disruptions, right, to times where, like in 1859, when we had that EMP. Well, back in 1859, it was a frightening phenomenon, especially to the slaveholders. And it was a powerful sign to the enslaved that their prayers would soon come, that the war that they had been asking for, that the Honorable Nat Turner had been preparing himself for, and as many of his comrades for, those were the kind of heavenly bodies and signs that they were looking at. But at a relative level to what I'm trying to prepare us for and get us to have a conversation, every Black person should know the term E period M period P period. It means electromagnetic pulse. They come naturally when the sun gives off so much energy and it thrusts to the earth. It's a pulsating, powerful electromagnetic pull. And that could have the power, if under the right circumstances, to literally black out entire nations, and not just for weeks, for 6 months to 2 years. What does the world look like for African people in the United States when the lights go out? It looks like 1919. It looks like the summer, the red summer of 1919, right? Today in the entertainment world, they do movies about periods where the government releases control, relinquishes its control, and cannot or refuses to intervene to create civility and order in society. And people have a reign of time to engage in all kinds of horrific acts against other human beings, with impunity, right? There are all kinds of movies, but this was the lived experience of Black people after World War I. It was so bad. They call it race riots, but it wasn't a race riot. It was an asymmetrical power who had all the power, all the weapons, and all the authority, and the law, and the judges, and the police force, and law enforcement, just abusing Black people who had none of that. But the problem this time was the brothers who came back from that war still had a war mentality. And they started posting up in Washington, D.C. Those former soldiers, those veterans came back in D.C. when they saw white men getting drunk and riled up, which was always the precursor to what we refer to as a race riot. It only became a riot when Black men started defending their homes and their territory. Okay, it's a riot, right? And sometimes Black people were accused of doing it. But those same circumstances where Black men in uniform, proud of their contributions, now came home and were being put back into their submissive role, beaten back into it, feared back into it, and not just by the citizens, but by the acquiescence, the turning of the head of the governments and law enforcement that allow white mobs to come into Black neighborhoods, burn things down to the ground, take Black women out of their home, rape them wholesale, and even lynch Black men while in uniform to let you know that the war is over and now you are just what you were before, an over glamorized slave. Okay? And why is that important? Because in 1919, when the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was speaking out against these race riots and talking about the injustices and how Black people needed to organize themselves, Black people could feel the pain. And so they had no other choice but to galvanize around a man who had a solution. Well, today, people are not as motivated. They can see the oncoming war, the race war, that people in the United States want to keep the arguments framed as, but the global powers want to have a different kind of war. And this is the struggle that you see playing out in the Democratic Republican playing field. There's one group that wants to stay just the way things have always been. They say, let's make it great again, right? They want to go back to the good old days when there was a clearly defined underclass that you could just look at because of their complexion of their skin. You knew that this was a non-citizen. You knew that this was a person who was vulnerable. You knew this was a person you could exploit, subjugate, exploit, and even exterminate. without impunity. They want to make it great again, right? And then you have another group of people. These are what you call the globalists. You hear this term? These are the people, they have a more global idea of power. They're not concerned about the good old cowboys versus the rest of the world, particularly the blacks first, and then the Mexicans, and then the Asians. No, these are the people who say, if you are not a part of this elite class of multi-billionaires, then you too are just like food to us. You are just a resource. There is no clearly defined race class. In other words, the pain that we have been under for 400 years, the pain is being dispersed, not equally, but a little bit more widespread. And now people who have enjoyed the fruits of our suffering for the past 400 years are now finding themselves in a state of emergency, battling against not just natural disaster, but man-made disaster. They're experiencing some of the pain of what happens when government betrays people. And they call it, sorry, the lighting is outside, and they call it a time when it's time to rebel, like you saw on January 6th. These are the people fighting the globalists. These are the people who want a clearly defined underclass, and they don't want to have to worry about being a part of the experimentations that took place in Tuskegee that will argue happened just recently, but it wasn't just to the melanated people this time. Right. And so now the pain, the 400 years that biblically the Hebrews are always talking about, that is up. That 400-year period is up. However, it does not mean instant freedom and retribution as some have imagined. It just means that the 400 years of clearly defined racial classes and oppression that they allowed us to be in a constant state of emergency, that has lifted. And now all people, so whether Asians or Europeans, if disorganized and if not considered vital to whatever the globalist agenda is, right, then they too will be fed upon. They have just been welcomed into the pool of suffering. And so this is the battle that we are seeing at a subversive level, at a lower conscious level, that's playing out. And it looks like this Democratic versus Republican. We need to raise our consciousness about it. In other words, when people who are not melanated, who are not of African descent, begin to experience the pain of constant ungroundedness, of constant destabilization, of constantly having to start over from scratch, of never knowing where the next event is going to come from, whether it will be a hurricane that we all have to deal with or a flood that we all have to deal with. But because the resources have been so unequally distributed over the years through all of the engines of racism, people could recover from natural disasters quicker than the poor and unprepared and disorganized peoples of oppression. Y'all follow me here? And so now there is an emergency. Everyone's concerned about an emergency. But if you pay attention to our lived experience over the past 400 years, always being at the mercy of man-made and natural disasters, whether that's earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, we've always had to deal with that without the protections of government and without the benefits of even I have to be careful about the organizations that I mentioned because I do work with them now, so I have to be mindful. But the organizations that respond to natural and man-made disasters, well, where do you think the Black Cross nurses came from? Why Black Cross nurses? Well, there was another color of crosses that responded to emergencies that were not meeting the needs of people of African descent. And thus, the appropriate response was to organize the healers, organize the food, the clothing, and address the needs. Today, when Black people's houses go on fire, there is no UNIA response to that reacts, that brings shelter, that brings clothing. Black folk are on their own, or they're at the mercies of FEMA and ARC and all these other organizations that operate under the auspices of governance. And so we have limitations about our response and our consciousness, largely because nobody like the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey is talking to us about the issues of war and how it will impact us. They don't know the pain of what it's like the women in the 19th century, in the 18th century, when your men are shipped off and you are left defenseless and you are at the mercy of the economic engines and then all of the people who are suffering as a result of it. Even Dave Chappelle and all the things that people love hearing about him talking about, they missed the part where he talked about when there was the depression and when Black people are suffering in economic depressions. His mom had to deal by herself with her two sons. She had to protect them from the Ku Klux Klan. And he said her defense was she would open the door before they even got a chance to kick it down, and she would hand them candy. She would just disarm them. But he remembers hiding in the closet with his brother and being at the mercy of white mobs. Right? So how is any of this relevant to us today? Right? Well, remember I talked about the Carrington event, that EMP that happened in 1859, just 7 years after Frederick Douglass took the stage and gave his powerful speech called the 4th of July, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, where he was literally warning people then about the impending war if they did not do something to reconcile with their oppressed masses, right? And he talked about these powerful energies that would somehow undermine the economic, spiritual, legislative, and political engines that held slavery in its place. And then we get the Carrington event. You have to hear another talk that I give in order for me to connect the dots to that. But all Black people understood the war and the impact that war has on asymmetrical peoples who are in the underrung of that asymmetrical power dynamic. No symmetry, no equality in power, right? No defense, no constitutional protections. Well, that's important because in 1859, when that powerful EMP hit the world, most of the world was living off of farming subsistence, we're subsistence farming. Not many people had power. Only about 15% of the US population, and sorry, I can't speak to more of the European experience, but about 15% of the US population lived in urban centers. 85% of the world lived in rural America. They farmed their food. They cooked their meats right off of the animal that they just killed. They picked their peas and their collard greens right out of the ground. So the only real technology of that day was the telegram. The tools that was used to keep enslaved people and inform, let's say, a plantation owner in North Carolina would somehow be able to inform a group of vigilantes in New York that Mother Harriet Tubman or some other ancestor had escaped. And that's how the information got across states so fast. The technology of the day was the telegraph. And not telegram, I had telegram on the mind. I just saw an interview, but the telegraph. And so the telegraph was a communication system that really only the world governments had. And so the EMP, it took the telegraph out of commission. Okay. And so what happens over 100 years from now when a solar flare hits the world today? Well, everybody relies on electricity to just do basic things, whether that's cooking, cleaning, booking your next flight. Our entire idea of civilization evolves around our access to that power cord in the wall, right? And so if an EMP, whether the natural one or the man-made one, which they're in the news talking about, and oftentimes goes right over our people's head, which is where a global enemy, right, an enemy to what the global power is considered an enemy, could literally detonate a bomb high up in the sky, not even with the intention of creating a Hiroshima type event that would literally destroy the body, but they could literally take out the lights, the entire grid, another term that Black people need to familiarize themselves. You're either on grid or off grid, right? And so in the preparedness community, people are always talking about what happens if the lights go out, blackout, day X, the day when everything goes off and the hospitals are not working properly, and the doctors have to decide whether this person should be a good use of a resource of oxygen or not because of the viability, right? We're talking about circumstances that typically this everyday average American has not had to think about. What happens when there's a long-term blackout and the grocery stores can no longer take your card and you can't obtain food? Well, typically in those types of situations, and they have happened, one of the first responses from the government is to go into an martial law or a lockdown, which means you have to be in the house by 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock or even 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whatever the local jurisdiction decides. Right. And there may be a certain type of declaration made. It could be a mayoral declaration that says we're in a state of emergency, or it could be a gubernatorial declaration or even a presidential declaration. What doesn't matter is if I say I'm having an emergency, it has no legal impact. But if the president, the governor, or the mayor decides that there's an emergency, your life can change in an instant. Okay. There's a new virus out. It's called EEE. Right? And they're saying that there's a voluntary lockdown. Have any of you ever considered what would happen to yourself or your family if for some strange phenomena, whether natural or man-made, occurred, like we have seen in recent times over the last 3 years, that prevented you from moving about as freely as you used to? Have you ever considered, can I hydrate my family? Can I feed my family for 2 weeks if I were no longer able to go outside? More importantly, I do case studies on this, what I call the pillar of water, and I'm going to offer it to your audience. It's a free workshop that I give on water readiness. It is completely in alignment with Garveyism. And these are the things that we need to be having on our radio shows and in our conversations, because why people are so oppressive towards people of African descent is because of resources. And we oftentimes become resources as the world becomes more technologically advanced, more medically advanced. They need to experiment. And not only that, but they need human resources, organs, tissue, melanin, everything that our body does while alive, it does 10 times fold when we are no longer alive. This is a very serious time that we are in, King. And I can't see you anymore, so I feel like I'm out in outer space. But do you guys have any questions? Are there any thoughts? Because these are the conversations that our ancestors were having every single day. They were organizing themselves. You talked about grocery stores. That was the dealing with food and water, right? The ability to supply, the ability to move around. That's what the Black Star Line was about. The parades, it wasn't just about the psychological impact of seeing Black men in uniform. It was also a mental preparedness of being in a position to transition from regular everyday civility into a potentially wartime posture, right wherever you are. There was a strategy and a method to everything. And even the religious context in which they talked about, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was talking about a God of war, right? What does the God of war look like? God as a warlord, right? He oftentimes made references to war. It was a central theme of every UNIA's persons. And it was understanding that because we were considered at the time the weaker peoples of the world, all of the negative fallouts of war, whether it's being drafted into a war against your will, or being the unintended victims after a war when people are still bloodthirsty and they've got all these skills of killing and now they cannot use it legally. Well, that's when they form mobs. They get drunk and they go and wreak havoc, right? It was the prerogative of young white men to be able to kill, and we had to deal with it for the longest time, right? But nothing is more of a dangerous time in uniform is during and after war, when people want to return everything to the racial hierarchy that it was before they were needed to take up arms. So there's always this ever evolving landscape of what your value is to a global body. When there is a global war, your body is needed. They'll put you in a uniform, put a gun in your hand, and even feed you and train you. But when things get back to normal, when Russia and the United States, when Russia and Ukraine, when they finally sit down and say, you know what, we're truce, right? We're going to go ahead and work this out. Let's just draw the line like they did during the Treaty of Versailles, right? Let's distribute the resources. Let's share amongst each other. Let's be good neighbors. Well, where do African people fit in after that? What good are you when you've aligned yourself with a Russia, and now Russia and the United States and Europe are coming back to the table to work things out? Well, those are global powers. You're not. So how does the world and the global powers now deal with you after you've aligned yourself with one of these nations, and that nation is now not at conflict with each other, but they remember your betrayal, your agreement to form allies? See, these are the same situations that African people were in over the last 400 years. It's always at the mercy of nations. And this is why it was so imperative that the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey was warning us. Even he talked about, and I'm going to read this to you, about preparedness. This is what the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey said. Preparedness is the watchword of the age. The watchword of the age. For us as a race to remain as we have in the past, divided among ourselves, parochializing, insularizing, and nationalizing our activities as subjects and citizens of the many alien races and governments under which we live, is but to hold ourselves in readiness for the great catastrophe that is bound to come, that of racial extermination at the hands of the stronger race, the race that will be fit to survive. This is what he was talking about. This is what he was constantly preparing Black men and Black women for, whether their role was as an active defender of the race or a nurturer of the race, whatever the rules are. He says they subjugate first. If the weaker peoples will stand for it, then exploit. And if they will not stand for subjugation nor exploitation, then the only recourse is extermination. Okay? All the time, every speech, he's talking about preparation for war. Now, at the convention in 1921, there were some very powerful statements that I want us to study. Again, he's talking about preparedness. He even talks about Joseph Daniels. You heard of this young man, Joseph Daniels? He refers to him as the white statesman that talked about and that warned about the day will come when the races of the world will marshal themselves in a great conflict for survival of the fittest. Now, I know we don't use terms like that publicly anymore, that's taboo, but listen carefully to what he has to say. Men of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, I'm asking you to prepare yourselves and prepare your race the world over, because the conflict is coming. Not because you will it, not because you desire it, but because you are forced into it. The conflict between the races is drawing nearer and nearer. You see it, I see it, I see it on the handwriting in the wall as expressed in the uprising in India. You see the handwriting on the wall in Africa. You see it in the handwriting of the wall of Europe. It is coming. It is drawing nearer and nearer. 400 million Negroes of the world, I am asking you to prepare yourselves so that you will not be found wanting when that day comes. Okay, this was 1921. We're in 2021. And the same powers that were warring 100 years ago are back at the stage. And you, ill prepared, will be forced into it. You will be drafted into it. You will be coerced. You will be enticed into it. You will be given advantages. But those of you who do not, yeah, we have to deal with the micro level. What does that look like? Because there will be a multi-phased war. It's not just going to be a clean war between European powers for the dominance of Africa and its resources, including its people. It will be a multifaceted war, a complex war of the types that we have never seen before. It will come in the form of technology, a term cyber attacks, right? The slow undermining of the stability economically of people, right? Your ability to acquire the things that you need just to sustain your household. These are the things that will be felt. And because they will be felt in each household, whether white or black, Hispanic or Asian, those who have the most vulnerabilities, those who are, as he said, the last hired are usually the first to be let go, right? And so those people who are struggling just to put rice on the table, to acquire chicken that is a real chicken, rice that's real rice, right? This war is going to take place through the resources. It will take place in the veins of medicine. It will take place in the faucets where the water is coming out of your sink. And so there's some language that you need to learn about, because the language of disaster, whether man-made or natural, is the language that they're not talking about on the radios when they're asking thousands of Washingtonians to think intelligently about what they regret wearing back in the 1990s. Or what hairstyle makes them laugh the hardest. This is the language of buffoonery. This is the language of genocide. This is the language of the co-conspirators of a horrible war that is a cold war against Black women and children and men. Okay, and so we cannot be we cannot be complicit with this. We must do the uncomfortable thing and talk about, because we have not done the mass organizing. Now we must bring our attention to our individual households and find like-minded people who were doing the work of making sure that clean water is available. That if the government says to you tomorrow, do not drink the water coming out of your faucet. I know it's an inconvenience, but we don't recommend you drinking that water unless you boil it first. But at the same time, they say, well, the thunderstorm that came, it took the lights out, and we probably won't have power up for another 48 hours, potentially a week, depending on what area you live in. But don't forget, boil your water. But what? You have an electric stove, right? And so if the lights are out and you have an electric stove and you have a boil water advisory or a do not drink water advisory, I'm talking the language of war now. Right? It's not going to always be in the form of a massive nuke or a massive, air raiding of some type like you're seeing in Palestine. Sometimes the war is more subjective. Sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes it can be in the form of a cold war, like the cold water coming through your faucet full of lead or full of hydrochemicals or hydrocarbons or full of bacteria and viruses, right? The war is going to take place in your kitchen sink first. It's going to be in the form of water. The Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey knew it. The Honorable Emmy Euphemia Jacques Garvey knew it. Those people in 1920s dealing with red summers every summer, dealing with having to struggle for clean water every year. They knew it. This is what motivated them. And so while we want to talk about how uncomfortable it was or how outrageous it was that our favorite rapper or our favorite celebrity or this amazing high profile business person or politician got denied access to one of the popular restaurants or shopping malls. And that's what we think of as racism. That's what we think of as our chief problem. That's what we spend our time talking about. Or this superficial political dynamic that we're always thrust in between. The same story every 4 years. Nothing is going to be in a position to prepare you for the fact that there's no Democratic or Republican president that will protect you from a blackout or from an EMP. They're not going to provide you with the level of comfort and shelter and the ability to sustain your current lifestyle. You alone are now responsible for it. And even our current day Black best organizations are not prepared to go into their even local communities and address the needs of Black women who need water. They're not prepared to address the needs of people who need food. I'm not talking about a few good people. I'm talking about on the scale that requires a Lahaina level, a Lahaina Hawaii level type of event. We don't have the capacity to respond. So at this point, we have no choice but to arm ourselves individually with enough knowledge so that we can provide the basic needs of food, water, shelter, power in the event of a blackout or some type of disruption to the grid, communications, the ability to defend yourself. Now, we not only have to worry about the threat that comes in the form of uniform or mobs like they had to worry about. Now it is our own hungry people that we must be prepared to defend ourselves against, whether you are a four-family household or a single woman. These are the conversations that we need to be having. I call them the 9 pillars of emergency preparedness. Let me test my memory. What I'm talking about is food. Can you sustain yourself for 3 days, 3 months, or a year if you had no access to a grocery store? If you couldn't get to, what is it called, Sam's or Walmart? If everything as you know it was disrupted, right? Now I can hear it. I can hear it through the airways. She's so negative. Don't you know that if you think on these things, you attract them? Okay. To my manifestation people, are you suggesting that our sheer thoughts create our reality and that alone is what creates our reality? Because if that is the case, are you willing to now say that the logical conclusion would be that Mother Harriet Tubman attracted the whoopings and attracted herself, born into slavery, attracted the abuses and oppression that she was born into? Was it her thoughts? Was it the Africans who were in the inlands of the continent who had never even seen a ship? Was it their thinking that caused the colonial powers to cross the seas and bondage them and transport? Is it their thoughts? Because if that's the case, I want to sign up for that manifestation class to prevent that from happening. There is no such thing. Okay. The people right now who are talking to us about dating, the people who are talking to us about alkalinity without providing the Garvey aspect of it. It's one thing to be obsessed with food and the preparation of food and the access to food, the veganism. I'm a vegan. I get it. I love alkaline. I love resources. But we are only thinking about a world as we know it today, where these are abundantly available to us, that there's no blockade, there's no obstacle between us and the alkaline water or the vegan burger that we want or the clean food. I'm talking about a different reality where you are struggling, where people are struggling just to get clean water. And it's not just Black people anymore like it was in the 20s. It's all peoples. All people are now competing for the same resources. And whenever you see a winter storm Or someone says that there's a threat to the water. Please don't drink the water. Don't use the water. Don't bathe in the water. We don't know for how long. Just use bottled water. And you see how the people run to the store, little old ladies getting knocked over, carts being flipped over, women who are normally considered civil fighting over the tissue. All civility goes out the door when the scarcity comes. The scarcity doesn't have to be real. It doesn't have to be based in reality. It just needs to be promoted, and the people will lose it. So this is the conversations that we need to be having, because the most vulnerable of this group, like we saw during Hurricane Katrina, which we should have never stopped talking about, that should be the case study of every Black school, every Black economic engine, every Black concern. What happened during Hurricane Katrina was, in fact, a simulation, a crisis simulation of the most inhumane kind. There was nothing natural about Hurricane Katrina. It was the confluence of years of neglect of infrastructure and the pipelines and the water systems. It was years of that. And everybody knows that hurricanes are coming to Louisiana. So when the two finally meet up in the undivine synchronicity that makes up global US power or US power, when they want to reduce or they want to uproot people or they want to claim property or change circumstances or destroy people that they consider undesirable, as Dr. York used to teach us, the useless eaters of the world. There's no need for you. Listen, family, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is the conversations that we need to be having. We need to not only group ourselves and have conversations about the history of Garveyism, the greatness of it, but what would Garvey be doing today? What conversations would he be having with us? What would the Black cross nurses be doing today? We're not prepared for it. So now the focus must be on individualism, because I can hear the thoughts. There are groups and pockets of people who are doing things, but not on the scale that right now, when I go to my location and I can't get the water, the alkaline people are not coming to bring me water. The vegans aren't coming to rescue me when there's no money in my bank for food, and they won't come for you. So we must balance our conversations around diet and dating, because like Baba Odunu, who's one of our elders who's now transitioned, used to say, there is no culture without agriculture. And the deeper meaning of that is that what galvanized families, societies, and organizations was the need for the basics, the food, the water, the shelter, right? They, in scientific terms, they call it Maslow's hierarchy of needs: first, food, clothing, and shelter. Right? This is the reason for the subjugation. When populations outgrow their landscape, what do? They take over neighboring countries. They either subjugate the people and make them slaves, they either exploit them after that, or they exterminate them, and then they take what they need. China and Africa. The strategies may be different, but the objective is always the same. It is the acquisition of resources. And if we keep these in simple terms, I need to see somebody. Come on. I don't know who I'm out here talking to. But if we need to, where I lost my train of thought.
Let's carry on. Keep going.
I'm just like looking at myself and I'm like, wait, am I even talking? Like, wait, I have to get distracted because I can't see anybody. And I really been talking for an hour already? Let me stop here, because in these kinds of forums, I really don't enjoy doing them, because I just have to, I'm trying to hit somebody. So I'm throwing out a bunch of different things to try to get people's attentions. And I don't have like an audience to feed off of. I can't see people or whatever. So I'm just trying to, the heading was called The Garvey Speak to Us of War. And they did. All you have to do is pick up any one of the books written by Mother Amy Jacques Garvey or compiled by her about her husband's speeches, and you will see the writing is on the wall. They were always dealing with the reality of war, whether it was an internal race war or an external war between global powers. The impact happens to us. And what that translates to us in this day and time is, I don't have the time to talk about it, but I have a workshop that I'm willing to give to this group if they're interested, to them for free, as soon as I get settled into my new place in September. And it's called The Pillar of Water. And I will explain to you what I'm trying to throw, like little bits and pieces of jewels about what we should be, what I don't want to hear about anything right now except for the resources of food, water, clothing, shelter, because it is the organizing force. It was the motivation for the UNIA. They never had the resources that they needed to enjoy life and even to basically survive life with dignity. Mother Amy J. Garvey was often talking about the indignities that Black men and women were subjected to, right? Not having adequate resources. The world right now is fighting for resources. And I think we need to start having different conversations and looking to what our ancestors, the jewels that they left us about, what the world would look like for them is very much possible to look like in a world where all of the worst, and I know all of the people who are thinking manifestation thought, like your thoughts manifest. Listen, I didn't manifest what's happening. The people of Palestine, the children of Palestine, they're not thinking these realities into existence. You have to also take into fact the age that you're in. If you are born into an agricultural age, your thoughts look like the ways you acquire food and water. And your marriages evolve around that. Your culture and your laws all evolve around the way you acquire resources and distribute resources and share resources and defend resources. Okay? People have been fighting over resources. And when this becomes more complicated, when it becomes more controlled, then they can distribute the pain more strategically. They can say, we're no longer going to totally enslave the Irish. And a European pope will say, you know what? There's a group of people, unorganized people, a primitive people, a people easily to engage in subversive conflicts with one another, and they happen to be standing on the bank of the world, every resource, every natural material, and all the people that we need to acquire them. Let's go enslave the most disorganized, and then we can organize our European powers and become the global leaders of the world. This is what we're dealing with, and we're still dealing with it. Have any questions before I can just run on my mouth on, keep going on and on? I mean, I can point you to countless examples where Garvey is constantly talking about this unpopular subject of war and the impact that it has on everyday African life. And I can talk to you about it, but I can't do it in a forum like this, intelligently, in a way that makes sense. I have to give you a walkthrough. And I do a walkthrough, and I would love to do it for you if you are interested in doing it, because I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there, and probably I'm not connecting the dots as well as I should. But I want to raise your consciousness. We need to start talking about the language of emergencies and the language of war. They were doing it during the UNIA's time in the 20s, and we need to do it today, because there are consequences for not even being mentally prepared for and not knowing the language of law. I often tell people, just like lawyers use everyday terms like consideration and agreement, just like we use in everyday conversations, they have completely different meaning in a legal sense, right? Mm-hmm. When I tell my grandmother, Grandma, I know you purchased this contract with this furniture company, but he's saying he can come take it back because you guys really didn't have a valid contract. And when you missed a payment, he's saying that, I can come get my stuff, right? And so when I say, my grandmother, she'll say, well, I talked to him and he explained to him and he agreed that I can do this and this is just an inconvenience. And I said, well, Grandma, you really don't have consideration. And she puts her hands on her hips and she says, now, Sheila, you know better than to say that I don't know how to treat people. You know. And I would say, no, Grandma, I don't mean consideration like your kindness and your respect and your thoughtfulness. I mean like the bargain for exchange type of consideration. That is what makes an element of a contract valid. It's an element of contract law. Consideration is a bargain for exchange, a meeting of the minds. The contract that you have, although it was a verbal one or it could have even been writing, it's missing this important element, and therefore it's not valid, and therefore he's coming to get his stuff legally, right? So just like lawyers have a language that sounds just like English, well, the disaster, emergency, and war world also have a language that sounds just like English, but it has completely different meanings. And one of them that I want everyone to pay attention to is a boil water advisory, which is lesser than a do not drink water advisory, and which is less devastating than the worst of them of all, which is a do not use. What does that mean? What does it mean? And how does this war that is going to be waged on Black people and humanity at large, how does the water war look, and what do you need to be prepared to help yourself, your family, and then at a larger scale, your community, and then at an even larger scale, your organizations like the UNIA and whatever Black organizations you're involved with. This is the kind of conversation I want to be able to assist you with. And even if you don't get it from me, there's lots of people talking about it. But the Garveys, they would be talking about it today.
So Sheila, I would say dots connected very much so, even if you did feel like it was the case. Let me just quickly put a marker in here. The workshop, yes, we just need to discuss time frame, process, whatever, format, whatever. Yes. One thing you went into mentioning, but didn't continue, if you mentioned something about the 9 pillars of preparation. Number 1, which was food.
Yeah, food. Number 1 is water. We can all go arguably for 60 days without food, but you can't do so much without water. If people say, well, you need water within 3 days, let me tell you, to be an optimum thinker, to respond appropriately to the changes that are happening in your world, your body must be hydrated. And the worst, most dehumanizing thing, I have personally experienced it. It's why I give the Pillar of Water workshop for free. So I have a workshop that's called the 9 Pillars of Emergency Preparedness. Don't worry about the term emergency preparedness. What I'm talking about is Garveyism 1920s, okay? But in order to get a larger body of people, right? Not the experts who know everything, but the everyday people, your grandmama, my mama, your sister, brother, and kids, the people, everyday people. What I'm trying to help them do is understand the events that are happening around them, put some things in place at whatever budget they have available. I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. I don't like, I oftentimes talk to people and I'm like, you know what, when I leave a conversation with you, I feel unhealthy. I feel unhappy. I feel like this is too much for me. That's not what this is about. When you start to understand, it's inherent to feel bad about the conditions of the world, but you're going to feel bad whether you're conscious of it or not, because it is going to affect us. The key is to move with intelligence, to buy yourself some time and to give yourself some options. For example, during the COVID-19 crisis, just 3 years ago, at the same time that crisis was going on, which was already causing all kinds of mental health issues and economic issues for people, right? Texas had a storm so bad that it took their individual grid down. They're not a part of the entire United States grid. It happened at the exact same time. Now, most Texans don't have a heavy coat to get them through a winter. They found out for the first time that they live in stick houses because the ice coupled with the water, coupled with the winds, just brought their little houses tumbling down. So people who had multi-story houses had water pouring down to the first floor. So they had a COVID issue. They were told, don't be within 6 feet of anybody, including your newborn, right? They were told that if you are not vaccinated, don't come to our shelter to get warmth. And they were having a snowmageddon in Texas. They were dealing with pure ice and cold. People froze right in their house. They never shared the figures with us, but that was another case simulation or case study. And what that showed is how people respond to unnatural disasters that are not common to their area, right? Texas is used to heat waves. They're used to even flooding. What they weren't prepared for was a snowstorm, right? So they were hit with a curveball, right? And so because they had no power for periods of time, and even though okay, so this is where the Garveyism comes in with the race and resources, right? People are oftentimes positioned by zip code, right? They know Black neighborhoods and they know white neighborhoods. They call them affluent communities and poor communities or underprivileged communities. They have all kinds of colloquialisms for Black and white living areas. But there were supposed to be rolling blackouts. This is what they reported to the media. They were trying to control the distribution of resources, the resource of power and light, right? Now, the public was told, the rest of the world was told, oh, we are distributing this pain, the distribution of pain, the turning off of lights, of power. We're distributing it equally. Those who are in affluent communities and those who are in poor communities, all communities are going to experience rolling blackouts, right? We're going to distribute the pain equally. In the reality on the ground, Black people will say, our lights was off 24/7. There was no lights off. And you can see from downtown was lit up like a snowball, where all the headquarters for the corporations and the affluent neighborhoods. My auntie, who lived in Spring, Texas, didn't miss a beat. She lived in an affluent community, right? And her lights weren't ever off. So depending on who you ask, this is why as Black people, we can never dismiss anecdotal stories, because this is where the truth, you have to discern the truth of people's lived experience. They will tell you in the media that everything is being distributed equally. The paper towels that Hurricane Katrina are going to everyone, but on the ground, Black women who were on the ground, defenseless, with newborn babies and toddlers in that stadium for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days, 2, 3 weeks, a month, would tell you of the indignities that Mother Amy Jacques Garvey is always saying heaped on a weak and defenseless people, where there was no weaker and more defenseless people than a single poor Black woman with 2 babies in a stadium surrounded by strangers and hostiles and people who have lost everything, mentally and everything. And then you have soldiers and organizations, whether they were FEMA or the ARC or whatever they were come in. And a lot of them are filled with well-intentioned good people. But there were stories, and I know of several of them personally. I talk about it in my case study when we do the Pillar of Water, of people who were being sexually exploited, being manipulated because they had no defense. And the people on the ground who control the resources, even if it's just a bottle of water, would say to a sister, you want this water? Come meet me around the corner, and make her perform oral copulation. These are the indignities that nobody wants to talk about, but that are the realities of the ill-prepared and the weak that we must insulate our people from, and give them a warning ahead of time and explain to them why you need to allocate your resources more responsibly to deal with the impending possibilities of food and water shortages, power outages, defenselessness, where the police don't respond. We need to have this conversation, and it needs to predominate everything we talk about. Because right now, if I could describe an analogy, when the Garveys, using an airplane, when the Garveys were roaming the earth and doing their thing, it was like they were gathering all of the equipment needing to create an airplane. They were gathering the metals. They were gathering the engineers and the scientists and the resources. They were pulling all of this together just with their bare hands and minds, their sheer willpower. They were gathering the resources, right? And then as the organization reached its height. They had developed the plane and they were about to take off. And they actually probably did get to take off, right? And they were moving all the way over to Africa. Well, somebody came and shot a hole in the plane, and the plane came crashing down. And some people took and salvaged the parts, and they dismembered the people who were on the flight. Well, now there's another plane. This is the plane that the government says this is our plane. Well, the plane is taken off. It started taking off. It's already on. Passengers are on. Here is where we are right now. In terms of our organization and our conversations, we are at the part of the plane where the plane is in decline. It's actually in midair and it's going down. And the only thing you can do at this point, reasonably and quickly, is to put the oxygen mask over your own face. This is the phase I would like to describe that we're in. Everything that needs to be in place to create a massive global disruption of the type that we have not ever witnessed before, whether that's a convergence of economic disheaval, war, nuclear engagements between global powers, some kind of natural phenomenon or unnatural phenomenon made to look like a natural phenomenon, they're all in place right now. And we need to have some things in our individual possession, intellectually and resource-wise, to just brace for impact. Because the moment has arrived that Garvey feared the most. The day of reckoning is here. Everything that he sacrificed his personal life for, the people that are around him, the day of reckoning is here. The great race war is here. It will not be called a race war, but you will feel it in your race. You will know that it's personal to African people. You will know that you are under attack. And if you're looking, if your only tool is voting, then you're just going to keep voting and voting and voting and hoping that solves the problem. If your only tool is religion, then you're just going to keep praying and fasting and praying and fasting, thinking that's the only solution. Sorry. I think I'm talking too much.
Right. That's okay. Right. What we're going to do very soon is we could bring forward our spiritual leader, Brother Bandaka. Before I do that, though, let me just go to some of the comments that have been made. I want to hear up Jedi. Greetings, Garvey. I want to hear up Sister Shanice. Sister Shanice show on YouTube. Hail up, sis. Brother Kweku, good to join us. Native American readings. Good to have you here. J.E. Johnson, Kofi Campbell, Glenda, Kai, good to see you here. Who else have we got on the comments? Sister Joseph. Some people easy to oppress will be oppressed. Okay. Jaffia Mellowman. What the hell up? Rheingold Arundel. Greetings, family. UNA ACL St. Martin watching. Good to have you in the house from the UNA across the world. Chizeke, greetings, family. Greetings to you as well. Comment here from Brother Kweku. He says, Traore of Burkina Faso seems to be preparing his nation and Africans worldwide to think of controlling their resources and to know how the world is run. Do you think Traore is closer to your message? That's Brother Kweku's comment. I don't know if you've been following our Brother Traore in Burkina Faso, if you're any familiar with what he's doing and what he's trying to do. Fanusi says, seriously appreciate your comments, especially about superficiality that apparently consumes the greater number of contemporary Black people. Your words edify. Give thanks for that. Let's have a look at some new comments down here as well. Norway nationalize the oil and citizens. Let me just go to Brother Leader. But I mean, just quickly from what I say is we can see enemies lining up all the pieces in place right now. We saw it in the UK recently with these so-called riots that they had. Like I say, it was like a test run, to kind of like a barometer, as it were, to see how it would be. So, but certainly we do want to get our spiritual leader, our Brother Leader Bandaka's comments. Let's bring him in to the platform. And I say, Brother Leader Bandak is spiritual leader of the Alkebu-Lan revivalist movement. He's an activist over 40 years standing. He's also an African-centered education consultant. He's also the visionary that brought us the Mosiah season, which is celebrating now 31 days, celebrating the life and legacy of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. So I want to say, welcome, Brother Leader Bandaka. Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives. He lives.
He lives. So, Brother Leader, I know you've been glued to your screen listening to our dear Sheila. What's your initial responses and thoughts on what you've heard so far today?
Well, tendai mwari rumbidzo kuna mwari ye Africa, to the God of Africa be the glory. And we give thanks and praises unto Mwari Nyakusika, God the creator of the universe, through Mukuru, our great ancestors, for clearing the pathway for our sister to minister to us this afternoon, coming out of her very busy schedule in this, the 31st day of the season of Mosiah, where we, for 31 days, observe and celebrate the life and the legacy of the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, reminding ourselves that he gave us the black print for our total liberation. My dear sister Sheila, bless you and give thanks and praises for bringing the message that you have, the very serious message that you have brought to us, the clarion call that you have sounded to the African world this afternoon, reminding us that we are at war. We are at war as a people. It doesn't mean that we want to be. It doesn't mean that we are aware that we are at war. It doesn't mean that we are fighting back in the way we should be. But there is a definition of war that goes, war is declared when a people's space or a nation's space has been invaded by another. And you talked about space as a repository of resources that are vital to the sustenance of life. And you have demonstrated, my dearly beloved sister, clearly how that physical space has been thoroughly invaded. You talked about controlling space and owning space and dominating space. And it is clear from any objective assessment of African reality, not only on the African continent, but wherever we find ourselves, that our spaces are being invaded. But of course, it's not only our physical space that has been invaded, as you have alluded to, my dear sister, but it's every iota of space that we can consider, including our mental space, our emotional space, our psychological space, our cultural space, our spiritual spaces, the spaces in the context of our relationships, the relationship between an African man and an African woman, a mother and a child, all of those spaces in between have been invaded by the oppressor. And they have redefined and reconfigured and disconfigured our relationships by invading those spaces and redefining for us what relationships are and how our relationships should be conducted and so on. So on a very microcosmic level, we have been invaded as a people. And as you have demonstrated, my dear sister, we have been invaded for at least 400 or 500 years by the Europeans. This is why Papa Garvey said God made man Lord of creation, gave him possession and ownership of the world. But you have been so darned lazy that you have been the other fella to run away with the whole world, and now he's bluffing you and telling you that the world belongs to him and that you have no part in it. That's a serious indictment from the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was not cussing us out. He wasn't cussing us out. He was trying to wake us up to the reality of the ridiculous situation that we find ourselves in and the absolutely dangerous situation that we find ourselves in, that we must rescue ourselves from. And where does it begin? Once again, Papa Garvey demonstrates to us. He says if 400 million Africans would only get to know themselves. Let me say it again. If 400 million Africans would only get to know themselves, then he says in the next 24 hours, we would have a new race, a new nation, and empire resurrected. But the vital prerequisite is that we had to get to know ourselves. But in order to get to know ourselves, we have to get past, again, the invasion of our mental spaces that has redefined who we are as African people, that has redefined our realities, that we don't even know ourselves. That's why Papa Garvey says, if, the caveat, if we, 400 million Africans, which was the estimated number of us on the planet today, could only get to know ourselves, and in the next 24 hours, we would have a new race, a new nation, an empire resurrected. And the ridiculous situation we have whereby Africa, being the richest continent on the face of the earth, its people are the most impoverished. I didn't say the poorest. I said the most impoverished, because this is a condition that has been imposed upon us. It's not a natural position. It is a condition that has been imposed upon us through a global economic system and political system that we are yet as a people to really come to grips with. So the message today has been a vital message. I said before, it's a clarion call. This is war. And the purpose of war is always to dominate or exterminate. The problem with, and our sister talked about the 3 phases of subjugation, exploitation, and extermination. The problem is, even if we succumb to subjugation, subjugation is simply a slow, more gradual form of extermination, because they can decide when it suits them that they only need that we're surplus to requirement. And once they determine, and with the advancement of science and technology in this 4th industrial revolution, and even talking about a 5th industrial revolution, where human labor will be less required, less vital to their global economic oppressive system, exploitative system. So they can just casually determine that more of us are less, are surplus to requirement, and they will just have sophisticated or technologically sophisticated ways of eliminating us as they do presently. So we had best, as a people, listen to Sister Sheila. And Sister Sheila, you have hit the mark. We have been listening to you. We have been tuning into you. And we have been drinking, my dear sister. We have been quenching our thirsts at your fountain of knowledge and wisdom. We know the extent to which you have studied Papa and Mama Garvey. The last time you were with us, my dear sister, you blew up such a storm. You know, you actually resurrected the spirit of Mama Amy Jacques Garvey. You brought her alive. It wasn't just that you delivered that message so powerfully and beautifully. You presented yourself as the vessel through which Mama Amy Jacques Garvey could inhabit for that period of time and speak to us. This was Mama Amy Jacques Garvey who came. Even your accent changed. You sounded. And I grew up in Jamaica, so I can tell you, you sounded like any sister I would have heard in Jamaica when I was growing up. You just got so possessed by the spirit of Mama Amy Jacques Garvey. And when I come across, we had you mentioned Sister Shanice's brother Olatunji. And this brother Olatunji, let me just tell you, is a marvelous, wonderful brother who has been working hard for the Alkebu-Lan revivalist movement for many decades, and in particular, working hard on the Mosiah program that has been delivered to our community this week. I just want to hear him. You did? And he mentioned Sister Shanice. I don't know if Sister Sheila is in connection with Sister Shanice. If you are not connected with each other, you need to connect and get to know each other. She's a powerful, awesome sister in our midst, and I'm just honored to know that she is tuning in to us. Of the mind and the spirit and the vision of an Amy Jacques Garvey. Sister Sheila Tatenda, Medasi Papa. Thank you so much from the tongue of our ancestors, from the heart and soul of our people. Tatenda, Medasipa Asante Sana, for the word, sounds, and power. And brothers and sisters who are listening in, we have to wake up to our reality. We have to do the work that needs to be done. Africa is the richest continent on the face of the earth. Africa awaits its children. Let me just quickly round off with the words of Papa Patrice Lumumba, who in that famous speech that signed his death warrant, he said, this land of ours, Africa, is ours. And we are, in fact, its only masters. In another speech, he says, I will not stop until every blade of grass and every particle of dust of this land is firmly fixed in the hands of the black man and the black woman. Only then will we reclaim our resources. But to crown that, reclaiming our resources begins with reclaiming our human resources, the resources of our minds, the resources of our hands, the resources of our genius, and start to channel those resources, those human resources, synergistically, meaning working together, where the sum of our collective effort, the sum of our working together will be greater than the sum total of the same individuals working separately. Tender again. Give thanks, Sister Sheila. Tender Imari. Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives.
Heal him.
Yeah.
Brother, thank you so much, beloved elder. I thank you for the reminder about Mother Amy Garvey. If we have a minute or two, there's something I would like to share that's, I think, so relevant to the discussions that we're having in the media today. I talked about it the last time that we were here, but let me know if I have time to just share some words from Mother Amy Garvey. I think it'll be a nice way to close out the conversation. Is that okay? So, okay. So remember I was telling you the Garveys were always thinking about war, always preparing the people for war, always politically disengaged, and one of the things that I think is so very timely to show how relevant she is, even to this day, whether Amy Garvey, our archivist, our historian, our political thought leader, she wrote an article in 1927. Now, keep that in mind because we're only, 3 years away from this year to the 100th year, right? She wrote an article that's called Africa Bides Her Time. Now, when Mother Amy writes, she has this very linear way of thinking. So she makes an argument and she draws on facts that supports the argument. She does her analysis and she draws her conclusion, right? And then she ends with a little bit of poetry sometimes. And this is one of the articles, which is very short, in which she did that. And it's almost like reading out of the headlines to today. If you could just transport yourself back into her time, and then also at the same time, look at the players who are engaging in the world stage of economics and war today. She says, it takes some big physical demonstration to make some Negroes appreciate the necessity for and worthiness of the program of Garveyism. The Chinese war now being waged has done it. 10 years ago, when Marcus Garvey started his crusade and informed a warring world that peace could only be brought about when each race group and nation learned to respect the rights of the other, and that as Europeans claimed Europe as its exclusive possession, so should Asia be for the Asiatics and Africa for the Africans. He was laughed at by some Negroes and dubbed a dangerous man by European land grabbers. Today, the slogan, Asia for the Asiatics, created by a Black man, is the war cry of millions of oppressed Chinese who are letting Europeans know and feel that their home is in Europe, unless they are willing to be governed by the Chinese. Y'all paying attention to what she's saying, right? Hundreds of years of prayers, petitions, and appeals made no impression on the millions of oppressed Chinese, made no impression on the European powers who were exploiting China. But less than 1 year of fighting made Europe give the decision to leave China alone to work out her own destiny. Under the caption, Wanted, Fight for It, Mr. Arthur Brisbane of Hearst Publications wrote, if you want anything in selfish civilization, fight for it. China started fighting, and Europe suddenly becomes polite. Russia wishes China well, thinks she should rule herself. Asia has learned what Africa is now learning, that what is worth living for is worth dying for. But Africa is not asleep. She is in the organization period, uniting her tribes, linking hands with her scattered children in all parts of the world, educating them for the great task of self-government, and instilling in their minds the love of race and the love of country. It is a great task, but once this task is done, the battle will be comparatively easy. For what human resources could be successful in defeating 400 million well-trained Negroes? They had better sense than to try such an unequal conflict. They will yield as gracefully as they yielded to the Chinese. Africa will be redeemed, perhaps without the shedding of blood. But in the meantime, Africa bides her time, and from the ocean strand, or jungle, mountain, vale, and mead, the swift-word unity will speed on wings of wind and woo her fretful folk into one dream, one heart, one hope, and yet again she'll claim her sacred right to rule herself apart from the alien right. But if once more the pale-faced man shall say, not yet, thou backward race, still thine to pay, I quake to think how sworn the arms shall hurl thundering terrors at a grasping world when Africa awakes. That was a thought that was so appropriate. But do you see the same players, right? China, Russia, the European colonial powers. It's so interesting. And this is almost 100 years ago that she wrote this article to the day.
Yeah.
To the day.
And Tatenda, thank you, my dear sister, for putting China and Russia into perspective.
Yes.
Into the correct war analytical perspective for our people. Because many of us have that dependency mentality. It must be one or the other. Yeah.
And Garvey oftentimes is kind of misquoted, but he said, you know, we don't have any outside allies. What he actually said is we make no permanent allies, right? In other words, it might be expedient to develop an ally or a coalition, but never will they be permanent because peoples are naturally working towards achieving their interest. And sometimes they oftentimes misalign interests. So right now it's in the interest of all European powers to connect with different aspects of Africa. But when those powers get together after the war and they start distributing resources, then what happens to the African powers? Right? We even see it happening in different times throughout the war, where during the Revolutionary War, enslaved people who were enslaved by both Europeans and Americans alike were finally enticed to fight in the war on the behalf of Europe in exchange for freedom. So they will reorganize themselves as convenient. But after the war, when those powers were reconciling with one another, it was hell to pay for the Africans who chose a side. So we must always take advantage of the expediency of the moment, especially when you have no position of power. And sometimes the only thing you can grab onto is whatever hook is at your fingertips. It's the right time at the right place to take a move, right? This was oftentimes the defensive posture that people of African descent found them on. They made no wrong decision in choosing one side or the other. It was based off of the circumstances that they often had to deal with in the moment. But when you're reconciled with America, it was again right after the war where African people see what it's like to be in the bottom rung. And somebody doesn't, and your audience doesn't like the word asymmetry. Nobody owns the word asymmetry. It's just a word. It just means the equivalence of power. It's all I'm trying to use it to describe, right? Remember, we're just using language as a tool for
unequal.
Yeah,
unequal, unbalanced.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't mean it to adopt any political positions one way or the other, but it is a powerful word that describes the relationships that we have had with European powers and that remain to this day. And so people who fought on behalf of the Revolutionary War for Britain, they were promised freedom, and some of them actually acquired that, but not to the fullness of this extent because there was no protection when they were taken to what are the islands called that they're referred to, the British Isles, somewhere between, I think, Canada. It's like a series of islands where they were extracted from here because it was no longer safe. And so the Africans
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia, yes, Nova Scotia. And so some of them were taken there, but once they got there, again, they were in the battle for resources. And the everyday working whites waged war because they were coming and they were getting paid by the business class to do things cheaper, just like we see here in the United States, where a class of people are being imported in to provide cheap labor. Well, that's the way that the working class of whites were considering, their competition. And now they've got these free Africans who were happy to just get paid and would take a lesser pay than they would. So they don't attack the business class, they attack the vulnerable Africans who had no law enforcement protection, and they lynched them, they mobbed them, they beat them, they killed them. And this is after they had achieved what had been asked of them for Britain. Britain did not provide protection. Okay, and same thing in the United States. Those who were considered those who allied with Britain, even though the British and the United States reconciled, the Africans that were here, the Black people that had to make a choice, they either suffered greatly or they suffered the normal suffering that every African had to do for the next 100 years of slavery was going. And my only statement with that is that we don't have permanent allies among other classes. It is always understood that when the organizing powers, when they reconcile with each other, when they reorganize, they do not bring us to the table with them. We are often less. And this is why in 1919, during the Red Summer, Black people understood that wartime is the most, and after the end of a war, it is the most vulnerable time for people of African descent, especially veterans of African descent.
Right.
And so we have to keep all of these things in mind. But these are conversations that I'm only alluding to. So don't draw too much from the statements that I'm making out of context. I'm just, whatever comes to spirit to say, I'm trying to speak to that particular point. But this is not the forum. This is just a raising consciousness about the times that we're in and the language that we need to start, if not adopting, at least understanding, so that we can better equip ourselves in an individual way, that it's the individuals who come together in groups that form communities, right? And when resource A, water, I have lots of water and you have food, then we can create a bartering, supportive, useful, respectful, symmetrical, if you will, relationship with one another that's based off of our collective contributions, right? But you have to be prepared to do that. You have to be prepared to sustain your own house. Even right now, if all of this is cut off and I don't have access to YouTube, right? What do we do with next? And that's why I said even more important right now than security and arguably food is communication. How do we connect with one another in a grid down situation? How do I know what's happening with you, Brother Heru, when I'm here and I don't have cell phone access, no landlines are working, and it's been months since I've talked to you? I don't know what the state of Black people is in the country. And so the pillar of communication is so important. It's an important communication, even more so now, because information is never equally distributed and it's never fully distributed, because if it were, people would be behaving very differently. And as you can see from what I described at the radio station, they don't want Black people thinking in terms of the realities of the world and what will happen if or when these realities, whether it's just a basic hurricane. The presumption, unfortunately, for many people is that the government will step in and they will take care of me. And I can tell you that if they do step in, it's not going to be long term, and it's not going to be able to help you sustain your current lifestyle if you care for that lifestyle at all. So you better put some things in place, and I will love to have an opportunity to do a 4-hour workshop, and it goes by so fast, but it's called The Pillar of Water, and we're going to do a case study on Hurricane Katrina. I'm going to give you the advisories and what you need to do and how you need to equip yourself with the advisories. We're going to talk about the implications of water as a tool of war, and also the powerful ancestral ways that our ancestors used water and the other elements as a tool for freedom. So it's a very powerful, it's a very Garveyite experience. It's storytelling, it's fact-based, it's case studies, it's legal analysis. You will leave that workshop different, and I'm going to do it because it's my mandate to do so without charge, regardless to who's being there. It is what they call today culturally competent workshop. It is designed for the African experience, the African mind, the Nubian mind, the melanated mind, the UNIA mind, the Moor mind, whoever needs to hear the word that triggers them. It is a workshop designed in sincerity, not insincerity, but sincerely for you to open a level of conversation and to do things a little bit differently. Okay. And I'll give you the details about it.
May I just make a point?
Go ahead, Brother.
Yeah, on the issue of alignment, allyship. Sister Sheila makes a very valid point in terms of understanding the dynamics of alliances and Papa Garvey's own insight where this is concerned. And our sister quite rightly uses the saying, there are no permanent friends, no permanent, just to complete it, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests in global geopolitics, only permanent interests. Now, for us as African people to determine whether an alliance is valid or valuable to us as a people, we have to be clear about our interests. I am not sure that the people who are at the forefront of African politics in the world today are clear about what our interests as African people are. What I am clear about is China is clear about its interests. Russia is clear about its interests. They are both aligning with each other because it suits them mutually. They're both nuclear powers. There's some symmetry there. We as African people and the African continent, we don't even have continental symmetry because we are so divided. We don't have the Union of African States envisioned by the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and that which the Osagifo, whose month we are entering into, him being born on the 21st day of the 9th month, that he tried to forge in his time. We don't have that. And so if we are going into relationships or so-called alliances with great powers in the world who are clear about their interests, who have the wherewithal to defend and promote their interests, and we are not clear about our interests, nor do we have the tools, the resources. You talk about resources, my dear sister. We don't even have the resources. China manufactures its own weapons. Russia manufactures its own weapons. Yeah? Then we are on a hiding to nothing. We are junior partners. We're junior partners in the face of superpowers or mighty powers in the world who are clear about their interests and who have the wherewithal to back up and defend their interests. And that's my concern about the validity. I think all we have left is strategic engagements. That we can engage in. But again, as I say, our Hercules heel is the type of leadership that we have and the type of politics that dominates not only the African continent, but the African world. So we have to come as a people on the ground with a new politics that pushes African politics and African leaders into a particular direction and even out of the seat of power or powerlessness that they occupy presently.
Give thanks for that, brother. I really appreciate that comment. Let's quickly go to the chat. Sister Shanice says she'd be honored to connect with our beautiful sister. Powerful message. So, Sister Shanice, Sister Sheila will happy to facilitate that connection. And certainly,
I can't comment in there, but please connect me to her, Brother Haru.
I'll get your details to her, Sister Sheila. No doubt. Gonna call it there, but sisters and brothers, if you really need to have more of the same, 45 minutes time right here on Very Media, we've got African State of Emergency. from the ASE Collective. So that's going to be courtesy of Kimbunga Media right here in 45 minutes time. So log off, get a comfort break, maybe something to nyam, and then come back for more of the same. If you're in the UK, sisters and brothers, we're going to see you tomorrow at our Shemira, African Spiritual Communal Worship out there in the Chestnut Centre in Tottenham. The theme is I'm a Child of Africa, dealing with our totos and what we need to do for them. And also here next Thursday, the 5th.
Well, of course, what Toto means children, Brother Olatunji, does it not?
Yes, indeed it does. And next Thursday, a final Mosiah session is going to be our brother Mbia. Is going to be about the impact of the UNIA in the Spanish-speaking world. So that's going to be, again, focused on the global impact of the Garvey movement from 19 teens to current. So, sisters and brothers, that has been our session today. I want to say a massive to tender, Papa Asante Sana to Sister Sheila again. The issue I think I have is actually, if you're so on point, and I think it kind of speaks to the radio show you're talking about. You're speaking about preparedness for war. And a lot of our people don't know there's a war going on. And that's a dire situation to be in. Where people lining up their battalions, economically, militarily, socially, culturally, in all kind of arenas. And we're just thinking about, like I said, the hairstyle we had back in the day. So that is the call, sisters and brothers. And I say not all of it can be spoken about here, as Sister Sheila rightly said. But we need to be clear about the time that we're in. We need to be clear about what our responsibility is, so and to our future. We have a black print. I think Papa Garvey organized and fought like a world power. So he could look at the world and see who he could engage with or not. We're not in that same space anymore, sisters and brothers. So we need to get back to that. And he's given us the guidance. You see, let's channel that guidance for us this evening. And we need to, or this afternoon, or this morning even, depending on where you are. And we just give thanks and praises for you being here. Rest assured, sisters and brothers, we're going to connect with Sister Sheila. Once she's organized the move and settled herself in a new place, we're going to have Sister Sheila back, because this is a life-saving message she's given us today. Life-saving, sisters and brothers. Without this kind of guidance and inspiration, we will not survive to the next century. Even if we may even survive the rest of this one, if we're not careful. So, on that note, sisters and brothers, we are gonna.
Brother Lutunji, can I just reinforce our Shemira tomorrow? That our Shemira tomorrow is going to be led by our children. So, beloved brothers and sisters tuning in, please come out and support them. They will be at the forefront of what we deliver to the community tomorrow. They have a powerful presentation, and part of it is going to be highlighting the resources of Mama Africa. There's a connection with Sister Sheila this afternoon, because they will be highlighting the resources of Mama Africa under the theme, I am a child of Africa, expressing their love and ownership of Africa as their motherland and its natural resources that they are informed and educated about. So please, brothers and sisters, come out tomorrow and give our watoto, our children, your support. Tendai Mwari.
Give thanks for that, brother. Yeah, sure. I say if you're in the UK, if you're not active, feel free to fly over to the UK for tomorrow afternoon if you can. If not, join us again next Thursday, next New Year Day, 8 p.m. BST. And of course, if you're at home, tune in 40 minutes time for the African State of Emergency right here in Kimbunga Media. We're just going to close on with our closing words, sisters and brothers, as we do as a standard way of finishing. We just say, let's remind ourselves to take from here what we've learned, what we've gained in knowledge, information, and inspiration, and to the streets, amongst our families and friends, our personal lives, our place of work, our place of study. Let's remind ourselves, Africans everywhere, let's remind ourselves to be a shining light unto Africans everywhere. Let's remind ourselves that Mwari, or Nobukwame, Nudume Sudume, Mwari, the African God, reigns supreme. That liberation is indeed at hand. At the close of our session, Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Garvey lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives.
Mosiah lives. He
Listen, brother,
lives.
thank you. Thank you for joining us for Mosiah season. Also, be sure to check us out on galaxyafiri.net this coming Monday evening. And it'll be from 7 p.m. BST for our 500 show on Galaxy. Hail up, Nana Kakumbabai. The visionary brought us Galaxy 40 years ago. We've been aligned with for the last 9 years. We give thanks and praises for that edifice around the world, galaxyafiri.net. Check it out, sisters and brothers. It is known as the only de-brainwashing station, and it is indeed known that for a good reason, sisters and brothers. So again, the tender for joining us. We give thanks and praises and bid you farewell for now. Tendai Mwari.
Tendai Mwari.
We're done.
All right, let me just end that stream.